The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. And we're very excited to host today's webinar, Maximizing Benefits of Microsoft Azure, a hands-on approach for business and tech leaders. And presenting today's topic will be Tom Kinser. Tom is a veteran Microsoft certified trainer and has expertise in database design, software development, and cloud computing. He does have a strong career background that encompasses the healthcare, financial services, retail, and manufacturing industries. Having spent 25 years in these industries, Tom is known to translate knowledge to the real world to help employees perform at the highest levels. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We do offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored to your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you'll get the free access to the recordings in the next 24 hours via email. Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adopting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. And since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation will be from the cloud practice area. Netcom Learning also offers a comprehensive training portfolio for cloud courses, and you can check up on our latest offerings right there on your screens. Private training to teams is also available, of which the learning plans can be customized to the specific needs of that audience. You can all access a variety of cloud marketing assets, such as the free 2-hour training, by clicking on the website available handout. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. So why should you attend this webinar today? Well, in this session, you'll get hands-on training to understand the latest advancements in Azure and the ways to unlock its full potential for organizational success. And now I would like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to adjust the window size to your liking. Simply hit the escape key and find the zoom button on the top left corner of your GoToWebinar viewer. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you do have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. To get the best out of today's webinar, we've included the slides, courses we talk about, and marketing assets in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. You can refer to them to get a better understanding of today's topic. And we do realize that many of you may have to log off early and want to let you know that as you do leave the session today, you'll be presented with a short survey. We'd like to request for you to take a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience and improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. And finally, I'm going to pass this over to Tom, our presentation person today, and I'm giving you the screen right now. Tom, go ahead. You are live.
Welcome, everyone. Let me see if I can. All right, so you can see the masterclass opening slide.
It's looking good, yes.
All right, great. Welcome, everyone. Again, this is Maximizing Benefits of Microsoft Azure, and it's going to have a strong focus really on the business side and what we need to be aware of when we're working with Azure. Most of our classes are technical, so we have plenty of follow-up courses for more technical aspects of this topic. Again, my name is Tom Kinser, and let's go ahead and get started. The agenda for this webinar is going to be basically understanding and experimenting with fundamental Azure services. And I want to keep it as fundamental as possible so that we can follow up on managing cost. Because once you get a handle on managing cost, you can see how it applies to all the services, because every service has a different approach of pricing and how you will manage the cost of that particular service. We will look at two major tools within Azure, and that's the Azure Advisor and the Azure Monitor. The Azure Advisor has a section within it strictly for cost. Plus, we'll see some other areas, and I'll give you an acronym to remember these in just a moment. And then the Azure Monitor leans more toward technical in that you can visualize the metrics, you can monitor different resources, you can keep up with logs, you can query the logs. And by querying the logs, you will learn a new language called KQL, introduced by Microsoft, that is designed for time series databases. It is a must to learn so that you can monitor the services and keep track of log information within it. I'll introduce you to that concept, but it's relatively simple. But we are going to focus mostly on cost and Azure Advisor, and then follow up a little bit with the technical side with Azure Monitor and KQL. And of course, at the end of the session, we'll have Q&A for any questions that may be from the audience. I was already introduced, so no need to go over this in any detail, but I am coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia, East Coast. So it's a warm afternoon starting here. You may be in the rest of the country or around the world. Most of my training in the past has been through healthcare and healthcare insurance, but also retail, manufacturing, and more recently, a lot of government, state and federal government. I do teach internationally, and if you'd like to connect with me on LinkedIn, there's my link for Get Tom. So if you're brand new to the cloud, which very few people are now, everyone is already using the cloud because the cloud is the internet. So it's just another name for using the resources that are available across the internet. So when we store data in the cloud, we're just simply storing data on internet servers. The same servers that serve up web pages and in e-commerce also have storage set aside for not only their web apps for you, but for your data. The most common use of the internet is, of course, the most common use of the cloud, and that is sending email between users. But when we get more specific to different cloud service vendors, you'll start to see different product names that you recognize. The most common cloud services that are shown here would be file storage, probably number one. Everyone has used either Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, etc., just to store their pictures. And then some of those files you do want to share, like pictures, are more commonly shared across Shutterfly, Flickr, and Amazon Photos, and OneDrive as well. Data backup is a primary use of the cloud. Carbonite, CrashPlan are just to name a few. But when we start talking about computing services, where we want to take advantage of the computing power of servers on the internet, then we think of the top cloud providers such as Azure, AWS, and Google, but there are many others. So we can't avoid the cloud. So it's not a matter of deciding when or not to use the cloud. You are using it, but how far do you want to take it? How deep are you going to go? Well, the focus again for this class is Azure. Choosing the computing services of Azure should be thought carefully through, but it's not exclusive. You may be using any other cloud vendor as well. What are the reasons to move to any cloud vendor? Well, cost is a big one. Because you don't have to invest in assets like your own servers, physical servers, or server rooms, or buildings and air conditioning and power for the computing services that you need, cost can be a big reason to move to the cloud. If you want to have a hybrid environment where you do have to keep your own data centers and take advantage of the cloud, then you must manage the costs carefully by eliminating some of the costs on premises as you move to the cloud. If you never get rid of what you're moving away from, then the cost will naturally go up. So we have to carefully consider what is it that we're going to shift to the cloud and stop using on premises, or how are we going to integrate on premises to the cloud and keep our costs to a minimal. Another big reason is if you're a global organization, we have global scalability in the cloud. Just within Microsoft's data centers, we have 60 plus regions around the world. Each have been divided up into zones and data centers. mostly in North America, Europe, but also East Asia, Australia, a couple in South America and Africa. So depending on where your customers are, you might want to leverage those localities. Performance. Now, performance is completely up to what you pay for. If you pay for the least expensive service, then you'll probably get the least amount of performance. So you have to balance that. If you need it fast, you need it cheap, you need it now, well, you've got to make sure that you are able to justify the performance needs against the cost. But the performance is there. You can scale up to a very high level in the cloud with clusters of machines, your own supercomputer in the cloud, through different ways such as Synapse Analytics for data warehousing, for batch processing, using high capacity computers that are networked together. Even using Kubernetes as a cluster of machines running Docker containers. Or you can keep it as low and as inexpensive as possible and destroy the resources when you don't need them anymore. That to me is a huge benefit of the cloud, is having the capability to create and destroy as often as you need. So if you only need what you may refer to as a supercomputer for 1 month out of the year, then spin it up, use it, and get rid of it. Security is, of course, baked into all the services. You can give up on having to worry about physical location security because Microsoft is taking on that responsibility at their data centers, but they're also monitoring the network that is providing the services that you need from Azure. So they are providing things like distributed denial of service protection and using machine learning to detect unusual anomalies within network traffic and automatically protecting you. Now, depending on how far you take this, of course, there are different levels of security that you can purchase as services, or different pricing tiers to get it higher and higher, depending on your needs, and all the way down to the data, how you encrypt the data. Different storages will have it encrypted at rest. They also automatically encrypt it in transit, and you can control the encryption if you like. Speed, again, is very closely related to performance. How fast can we get a response back would depend too on usually the resources and how they're configured. It should definitely improve productivity within your business. And because of the redundancy of these services around the world, and with zones and also locally redundant resources, we have a high level of reliability and availability. So any one of these may be a good reason to move some of your services to the cloud. But when you consider all of them, it's almost a shoe-in that you've got to start considering how you're going to leverage the cloud, not if you're going to leverage it. But it all begins from a business perspective. It's always cool to jump on technology as soon as it's available. Before you move anything to the cloud, make sure you know your own business. What line of work are you in? What do you need? What is regulated? What may not be regulated? First thing is you need to know your requirements and the business goals. Now, this is not something that's readily available usually from a technical standpoint, that this involves executives, leadership. It involves communication within the organization of where your organization is going. Because whatever you do in the cloud, you need to be able to justify it back to a business requirement. Know the cost of current in-house services. This is also something that, from a technical perspective, may not be well itemized. You may have never taken full inventory of the cost of what it takes to support your services internally. Now, of course, your accounting department, your purchasing may have all the data that you need, but if you could roll it up, including administrative overhead, cost of the building, electricity, air conditioning, in addition to the physical hardware, the network hardware, the servers, the blades, the racks, all of that you may have internally needs to be itemized, because you'll have no idea if you're saving any money by moving to the cloud if you don't know what you're spending now. And another one we'll see come up a little bit later too is why you're considering the cloud. Why is the business that you're in even considering the cloud? What are their goals with the cloud? So the first and the third tie very closely together so that you can stay focused on why and what you need to do. Without this direction, it's you will not have a successful move to the cloud because you won't be able to tie anything back to your business needs or business requirements. Now, this seems like an obvious topic, but unfortunately, it's not focused on in many different businesses. They just know that we've been told to move to the cloud. Let's move. And then it's up to the technical staff to decide what needs to be moved. Remember that first point. Whatever you're doing from a technical standpoint needs to be tied back to a business requirement, a true and obvious need of the business. Now, here's the acronym I promised. I made this one up because I wanted to remember it as a single word. CROPS, C-R-O-P-S. Now, you could rearrange it any way you want. It could be procs or crops, but just remember the 5 areas that you need to consider when you're designing and building the architecture of your solution in the cloud, and focus on every one of these areas. These are exactly the 5 areas that Azure Advisor will advise you on to give you recommendations. Number 1 that I focus in is always cost. I run a small business, so cost is very important. I want to minimize the cost and make sure whatever I use is actually adding value, not just for the fun of it. Because you don't want a surprise at the end of the month of how much something costs when you didn't even investigate what it was and why you need it. Also, if I'm going to run a business, I need something to be reliable. So reliability means it's going to continue to function. If there's any failures, whether it's on my part or Microsoft or network or the internet, that it can easily recover and I can continue functioning as a business. I also want things to run smoothly when they are available. So that falls under operational excellence, making sure things are running as smoothly and as efficiently as possible, which brings us to the 4th one, performance. Can it perform under different loads? An application may work great the first couple of weeks, but if it gets popular and you have more and more users coming in and more systems tied to it, can it handle the load change? And if it drops off, can it drop off on the needed resources so I'm not paying as much? So I need that scalability, that flexibility to adapt to the load change. And last but definitely not least, you want to think about security from day one, and you definitely want to start by considering how to protect your data and the applications that are either gathering or reporting on that data. So keep this acronym in mind. We're going to come right back around to it when we go into Azure Advisor, because Azure Advisor is going to give us recommendations on every resource that we may have provisioned in Azure under these 5 categories, which is referred to, as you see at the top, the 5 pillars of architectural excellence. So since this is about maximizing benefits, we're going to focus on the first category for most of this webinar, and that is optimizing cost. Optimizing cost begins, like I said earlier, is understanding the requirements from your business. So the first point here is you want to capture cost requirements defined by stakeholders. So who are your stakeholders? Well, they may not be technical users or technical people within the organization, but they are dependent on what you're going to be doing and using the cloud for. One point, notice on the end, not the vendors. Vendors, like any good business person, is wanting to sell you services, so they may not be aware of your true requirements, that they would just be offering different products that you can try or to sell to you. So make sure you're looking at requirements from the internal stakeholders. Number 2, understand governance and policies. Governance is not necessarily talking about government regulations. It's internal as well as external, but it would include government regulations. Maybe if you're in the United States or in Europe, there are different laws on privacy issues. Think of healthcare. But there's also internal governances, things that you want to enforce within your organization. An example would be all of our customers are on the West Coast of the United States, so we're going to enforce that all services stay on the West Coast, because you can accidentally provision a service in Australia if you're not paying attention, or somewhere else around the world that is nowhere near your customers. So by introducing a policy up front, you're going to control exactly where resources can be provisioned. And another very useful one is naming conventions. It's very easy to say, well, you can name it whatever you want, and you end up with a whole collection of naming conventions and labels that no one person understands. So that could be a simple governance that I always encourage to, as day one, is start developing naming conventions for everything that you use in the cloud. But definitely any external governance, especially government regulations, ISO standards that you're advertised as being as you're following them, any type of global standards will be able to be introduced and reported on by Azure Monitor, and the Microsoft Defender for Cloud also can come into play here. Estimate initial cost differently from on-premises cost. Remember, with on-premises cost, we're dealing with real-world objects and places. Your data center, the physical racks, machines, the network devices, whatever it is physically that you've had to buy and install and manage, is very different when you move to the cloud. There's very few specific pieces of hardware that are needed to work within the cloud. Now, if you've got a hybrid environment, you've got to delineate between the two, which ones are supporting on-premise, which ones are supporting a connection up to the cloud, and make sure that you view it completely different, that it's more like a utility now instead of based on physical assets. Another important thing is to know the difference between infrastructure, platform, and software as a service. Those acronyms, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, are the three major categories of cloud services. Infrastructure, IaaS, usually is determined by the use of virtual machines in the cloud that you have to manage. It also includes virtual networks that you have to manage. So if you can't take advantage of the other two, you may have to use infrastructure as a service, but don't focus on that being the only way to do it. If you're moving from on-premise to the cloud, that's the most natural way to think of it, that I'm going to simply shift my VMs to the cloud as infrastructure. That'll work, but you're not taking advantage of the other two areas. PaaS, platform as a service, will eliminate most all of your infrastructure management. You don't have to worry about the VMs. You don't have to worry about networks. So platform as a service really should be your main target, so that you can see if there's a service that can support my workloads in the cloud versus having to also support the infrastructure. Think of infrastructure as your last resort. If you can't make it work in platform as a service, then fall back to infrastructure. Don't just duplicate what you've been doing on premises directly within the cloud. Look for other opportunities to leverage and get rid of administrative overhead if at all possible. And of course, if you could go all the way to the third one, which is software as a service, that eliminates having to even support the application. It's already written for you. So of course, the two biggest software as a service from Microsoft would be Microsoft 365, which used to be called Office, as well as included services such as SharePoint. We also have Power BI. All of these are software, completed, finished software as a service, and including Dynamics as well. So those are Microsoft products that they have leveraged. Now, they're not the only one. Many software vendors are hosting their software in Azure and making it available to you, maybe through a subscription service. You may not even realize that your software is running in Azure. So software as a service completely hides both the platform and the infrastructure. So know the difference as you move to the cloud. If you can move to software as a service, which many businesses have with just Microsoft 365, that eliminates some of the basic business services you need from the cloud. Next one is consumption cost versus provision pricing. Consumption cost means pay as you go. If you don't use it, you don't have to pay for it, which is great when you first start out because you're kind of slow in adopting something. You don't want to have to pay a full rate for not using something. So consumption cost is a great way to start. If I dabble in it 1 week and then I wait 5 weeks and use it again, then I dabble in it again a little bit later. Or if I don't have anybody using it yet, they use it once a week or so, then you're going to save a lot of money by going with consumption cost. But at some point, when it gets very popular and everybody's using it, you've got thousands of employees or thousands of customers leveraging a particular service, it's going to cost more to use consumption cost than it would be for provisioned pricing. Provisioned pricing means that certain resources have a limited time, like a contract, maybe a contract that you have with a cell phone company, that you may be able to save money if you say, I'm going to commit to using it for a year or 3 years. Microsoft will give you a 70%, up to a 70% discount for saying that you will use it for a certain period of time. So find out where that makes sense. So you have to monitor carefully what your consumption costs are starting out as, which is a great way to start. But at some point, you probably need to switch over to provision pricing when something gets heavily used and you see it being heavily used for several years down the road. Always monitor cost, always. Don't assume that since you've monitored it for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 months that you've got an idea of that, this is pretty steady. This is always going to be like this. As soon as you stop monitoring it, it will surprise you. So set up a time where you constantly schedule monitoring the cost, and always review the monthly statements that you receive. And of course, your purchasing department or whatever accounting system you have set up may need to be involved in that and look at the trend and particularly implement alerts. No matter what your budget is, whatever your budget allows, even let's say personally, you may only allow a few $100s a month. We'll set up an alert. You definitely don't want to go over your limit personally if you're just playing with it, for your home use. But if you're in a business, no doubt you have a budget of not only tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Still set an alert. When you get within 80% of that limit, when you get into 90% of that limit, it may be surprising how soon you hit that threshold, so that you can go in and look at your cost. Next to the last one, use the right resources with the right size. There are many resources that have similar capabilities. Some are much more than you need, so you need to use a less expensive resource to get the same effect. Also, every resource comes in different sizes. You can oversize, say, a virtual machine. You can oversize the request units of Cosmos DB. So right resources, right size. And one more thing I probably would add in here is the right place. If you have all your customers on the West Coast and you set up some resource in Europe, it's going to cost you more because now you're having to go across to a data center in Europe to access or write the data. So make sure it's in the right location as well. Every service may have a different price per region of the world. So don't assume that because you know the price, say, of a storage account in the US, that's the same price as it is in Japan or Australia. There will always be trade-offs, and particularly for cost, which is probably the most obvious and most tangible way of managing Azure, is you're going to have to trade costs usually for higher security, higher resilience, higher scalability, and better operability. So if you focus just on costs, you're going to lose out in the other areas. So it is a balancing act. So make sure that you have a clear budget, that you've got support for that budget, because if you have to, if you discover something needs to be done differently, you're going to have to revisit that budget and monitor the cost related to that budget. This is a great slide to introduce cost, because to me, this has everything that we usually need to remember, but we fail to remember. And the reason for that is that the cloud is out of sight. Basically, it's when something is out of sight, you don't keep track of it. Here's a good quote I really like from The Sun Also Rises from Ernest Hemingway. How did you go bankrupt? These are two guys talking to each other. And the guy says 2 ways: gradually and then suddenly. And that's exactly what happens with cost. If you're not careful, you're not monitoring the cost, it will gradually and quickly start escalating, and that could lead to a type of bankruptcy. And this means literally bankruptcy, financial bankruptcy. But this also is an opportunity to introduce technical debt, which can also directly affect your costs. So technical debt, for example, would be trying to do something quickly to get it done instead of the right way and the more thorough way, because you eventually have to do it the right way. So technical debt is something you're going to have to pay for later. And if it keeps being ignored and keeps being put off, it's the same as not paying your bills. It's got to be paid for eventually. So cost must be carefully managed, looked at constantly in order for this, for you to be successful in moving to the cloud. And it's not a symptom or an attribute of just cloud services. It's a matter of not being aware that whatever you're doing has to introduce costs somewhere and somehow. And we may just assume, well, if it works, that's great. We'll use it and it must cost the same, but it doesn't. Everything costs differently depending on the type of resource that you're working with. And if you lose track of it, it's kind of like discovering how many streaming channels you're subscribing to, over the internet, and realize you're spending hundreds of dollars a month and you're only watching one or two streaming channels. It's going to definitely bite you later. So what are some design principles that we need to keep in mind? Back to what we first stated is the first statement: choose correct resources aligned with business goals. We want to set up budgets and maintain cost constraints. So when you first get into Azure, regardless of what you think you're going to spend, establish a budget. Budgets can be designed through the cost management system in Azure. I'll show you that in just a moment as well. And make sure that as you create resources, that you can justify what they're associated with, that you have a business goal associated with it, and that your budget is reasonable, and that you're going to stay within the constraints of that budget, and always aligning your business requirements or your budget to the business requirements. Third point that you cannot usually do on premises, you can't go in and add a new server and then within a week delete it, return it back to the store, but you can with Azure. Dynamically allocate and deallocate, which I say is create and destroy. Provision what you need, get rid of what you don't need. Optimize your workload. So what is a workload? A workload really is any technical processing power or storage needed. It relates to your IT assets, whether they're on-premise or in the cloud, that need to support a certain business functionality. So when you start thinking about your workloads, they're usually concepts that you can contain into one area of thought, such as let's say setting up appointments for a doctor's visit. How do you handle all of your appointments? That is one workload. What are the resources needed for that workload? So try to optimize that business workload and aim for scalable costs. Because the cloud makes scalability so easy, whether we're scaling up and scaling out, we can then make sure that our workloads are clearly defined so that we can scale specifically for that workload. The example of appointments: when is the highest use of appointments within your business? When do people make appointments? When do you schedule surgeries? Whatever it is that you has an up and down, high and low, peaks and valleys, make sure that you associate those workloads to something that can be scalable and you can manage those costs. And again, something I will repeat: continuously monitor and optimize constantly. It's never settled. It's never final. Things can change very quickly. Now, when we think of a resource, I've used the term resource and service interchangeable. So to clarify that, if you're new to Azure, is that in Microsoft Azure, a service is any potential resource. And a resource is an instance of that service. For example, a virtual machine. Microsoft makes it possible for you to spin up as many virtual machines as you want, whether they're Windows, Linux, etc. And they can be of multiple sizes, multiple capabilities. They can be more graphic have higher graphics storage versus basic memory storage. They can have faster chips, etc. But until you provision one, it's just a service. So as soon as you provision something, it becomes a resource, you start paying for it. Number one rule that I recommend for everyone is the first thing. I got a little chick there to represent start small as possible. Example of a VM, start with the cheapest, smallest VM and monitor it carefully. Test it. You'll find out quickly whether it's adequate enough to handle your workload. If not, then you need to scale it a little bit. But you're not going to know until you have a good idea of the workload that will be used in it. Same thing with storage accounts and relational databases and NoSQL databases. It's very easy to start medium or even start very large, more than what you need. So start small. Tweak it down as low as you can go. Next point, focus only on what you need and compare similar resources. Similar resources would be something like the computing power of maybe using containers in Kubernetes versus containers in ACI versus containers in app services. If containers is not a term you use, we're talking about Docker images that can run in multiple services. Which one is the most appropriate? Which one do you really need? So that means investigating similar resources. Which services do you want to provision as a resource and start paying for? Third one is something we tend to overlook. I tend to overlook is I assume that if Microsoft is advertising a service, then it must be everywhere. Not true. Make sure that the resources that you're going to use are available in your region. If you need to support customers, say in Johannesburg, South Africa, do they have the services down there? If not, is it going to be cost effective to use services running somewhere else in Europe, Australia, or wherever? Fourth one, check the price of each resource in the region. So once you find out a region can support it, is it worth it? It could be considerably higher in one region versus another region. Another thing to check for is the price based on the same capabilities. Here's something that most people don't realize is that in the US, we have up to 2 petabytes of storage in a storage account. Not true in Australia or Japan. So you have different limitations, different pricing per region for the same resource. Prototype and experiment with resource features. So you should have access to, say, a development, testing, or prototyping subscription within Azure so that you can start experimenting to see what resources are available, maybe introduce some real business load to get an idea of how it's going to support your specific needs. Next one across the bottom, identify metrics. What is it that you want to keep track of so that you can understand how it's being used? Don't save this for later. This is all part of monitoring so that you can get a handle on the cost from day one. What's important to you? For example, if you have a web app that you want to host in Azure, how many users are coming into what pages? Some basic web analytics is very important. Set up alerts on metrics that indicate higher costs. So, of course, if something's getting heavily used and it keeps, if you got auto scaling turned on, it's going to double, triple, quadruple your costs. So you need to know when that's happening. When did you auto scale, or when did a certain amount of storage get eaten up? Like for the storage account, you only get charged for what you use. So when did I jump from 2 gigabytes to 2 petabytes? Because now my charges will be considerably higher. Last point is completely up to you what metadata you may introduce, but you can tag resources. Tagging gives you the opportunity to make up whatever word you want and values so that you can keep track of how different resources are being used. For example, think of in accounting, if you have cost centers, you may have very specific cost centers unique to your business that you want to keep track of, that no matter how you organize your resources will be difficult to report on unless you tag the data. So tagging is metadata or extra information that you add to resources. Every resource can have many different tags. I think it's up to 60 tags per resource. So you could say, what is the cost center? What department? What project? What person is managing this? Who owns this? On and on and on. So that you can turn around and build reports from that to know how every resource is being used and who's incurring the costs and who do you need to contact about the cost. Don't overlook tagging. It's not required, but you could introduce a policy that could say all resources must be tagged with a cost center or something. So let's focus in on that first one. Start small. Start small by slowly, putting your foot in the door. Just get ankle deep in these resources. Here's an example of some of the ones that I always recommend if someone's new to Azure. Just implement Azure Backup. That can be done on premises. All of your data on premises can be backed up to the cloud. Very typical, easy way to get started with Azure. If you have any public images or files that you want to make available to customers or vendor partners or whatever, why not create a public blob container, which has no security except read-only. It does lock it as read-only, and put it in an Azure storage account. That means that you're going to make it available in the cloud for anyone and everyone to have access to it. Or it could be maybe a storage area for other web apps that are still running on premises. Another one is to create a file share. Most businesses use virtual machines on premises now, or physical machines, to set up file shares. You may have a J drive or a K drive or whatever it is mapped to a central file share location. Why not move that to the cloud? The Azure storage account allows you to implement exactly that, setting up a file share in the cloud. A little bit more technical is you could create a simple brochure web app. Now, brochure web app means it's read-only. We're just presenting information like a sales brochure, and create a very simple web app. It may only be 1 or 2, 3 pages, but just to see how it works, how to get started. It could be anonymous, where it's publicly available. You're not even asking people who they are. Another one is to define an Azure policy. Now, this is the example I gave earlier. You could set up an Azure policy to enforce naming conventions, what every database should be named, or what every storage account should be named, what every VM should be named, and also limit the regions that your resources will be provisioned within. Those are just some examples. 5 very simple examples that would be indicated as starting out small. Now, you may have a big plan down the road, but any solution or plan that you have down the road, be sure to be able to narrow it down to what is the first few steps we can take and start using this without building out the entire solution. And the reason for this is so you can get comfortable with Azure, but get comfortable with managing cost. As soon as you create a blob container, for example, in a storage account, you've got to manage that storage account. Setting up an app service, you got to manage that app service plan. Now, policies don't cost anything, but they will help you control what other resources you may be working with. So you can control costs indirectly by the policies that you set up, by making sure everything is in the same region. For one, that'll control your costs, and making sure that someone doesn't accidentally spin up a high-end virtual machine that costs me thousands of dollars per month, or even worse, spin up Synapse Analytics that can cost me $50,000 a month, and I'm not even using it yet. So policies are a great way to restrict only what you're going to allow within your organization. Use those immediately. Now, the next point was to compare. Here's an example of 2 similar services: an Azure storage account, which is the original type of storage available within Azure, compared to the new higher end Azure Cosmos DB. Well, Cosmos DB is going to cost you more. You can drop to the last line to see that, and it could be considerably more. But is it worth the features? Could be. But you need to justify it, of course, to make sure. Let's look at the top. The 4 types of stores within a storage account would be blobs, which can also be defined as a data lake. We have files, like I showed earlier with the file share. It could be message queues, and it could be tables. And tables here is a NoSQL type storage. But some of the restrictions are there's only at most 2 copies of the data in 2 different regions, and you cannot choose the other region. But if you go across, Cosmos DB can have multiple copies of data in multiple regions that you choose. So if I set up, say, a database in Cosmos DB that's the same structure, a table, just like it is in a storage account, I'll have the same capabilities, but I could have 5 different copies around the world. Third point, it says it supports SMB file shares. So with the storage account files or file shares, we can create a file share. Cosmos DB does not. Message queuing, storage account does, but Cosmos DB does not. Now, as far as message queuing is concerned, we have a third service called the service bus that can it's a little bit more robust than this. But then we have something at even a higher level called the event hub and the IoT hub that can process millions of messages per second. So that's an example of how you have to start investigating which resource is going to be the most appropriate for the least amount of cost. Azure Storage Account has support for NoSQL non-relational stores in tables only, not the other stores, but only tables. Whereas with Cosmos DB, we have NoSQL type stores in tables, core, MongoDB, Cassandra, and Gremlin. Now, Microsoft has recently introduced a SQL relational store in Cosmos DB called PostgreSQL. Now, PostgreSQL also has its own separate service, so it's a relational store, as opposed to Microsoft's implementation of SQL Server as Azure SQL databases, yet another type of store. But the Azure Storage Account does not support any SQL relational stores. So if you're going beyond the 4 stores in a storage account, then you need to consider either Azure SQL databases, PostgreSQL within by itself or within Cosmos DB, or MySQL, which is also a separate service. Notice too that the storage account, like I said, is limited to 2 petabytes. Now that's a pretty high limit per account, and you can have hundreds of accounts. So you could have 500 petabytes per subscription with just storage accounts. Now, Cosmos DB is a completely different type of measurement. It's limited to 20 gigabytes per partition, but unlimited partitions. So it will continue to grow and provide as much storage as you need, and extremely fast. I didn't add that to this table, but Cosmos DB is very fast, and it has high availability because of its multiple regions, but it comes at a cost. There are many other features available with Cosmos DB, but I think these are the most important ones to help you decide which one you might use. So if it's all about just storing files, then I think a storage account, it's a no-brainer. It's cheap. It has even multiple pricing tiers within it. So if you don't need the great features of Cosmos DB, then don't pay for it. Don't provision it. When we're looking at budgets and cost constraints, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to what Microsoft refers to as architectural patterns. And before we choose the right pattern, we want to consider how it fits into our budget. Every service that you look at, make sure you're aware of its different pricing tiers and know what you're getting for that pricing tier. We also have what's called boundaries you need to consider. Scaling is something you might want to limit. We have both horizontal and vertical scaling. Now, the difference between those two is vertical scaling means that I'm able to add more power to a single instance. For example, a VM, I might want to set up a VM with a limited amount of memory at first, but then I want to vertically scale it up to higher levels of memory or faster throughput. So changing a single machine vertically means it's still one machine, but I'm adding more capabilities to that one machine. Horizontal means the number of copies of that machine. So I want 6 VMs, so that's scaling horizontally. In fact, that should be your first reaction, is to try to scale horizontally before you scale vertically. But even that is just a rule of thumb. Maybe you're trying to perform some high-end graphical work on a VM, and it's so small and has such limited resources, it just can't do it. If you add another machine like it, that's not going to help. 3, 4, 5, 6 machines is not going to help because none of them on their own can handle the job. So that's when you need to consider vertical. I need more memory. I need a graphical card that can handle the load. So that's when you consider vertical. But in many cases, the peaks and valleys are determined by how many requests are coming in. Like I've got 100 users versus 100,000 users. Any one user could be handled by a single machine. But as I start scaling out, I'll be able to handle a few thousand users per machine. So that's horizontal. Make sure that you understand the differences, and when you start to scale, that you don't scale in the wrong direction for the wrong reason. Also, redundancy. Redundancy, many services will help you copy that service within the same data center, within the same regional physical location, or it could be redundant across multiple locations. And that will have a lot to do with protecting your data in your service from any downtime from Microsoft. It has happened in the past that a certain data center goes offline for a limited period of time, very short period of time. But as long as it's offline, if you've got all of your data in that one location and it's locally redundant, it doesn't matter. You're not going to get it. So you need to consider when you need to copy your data or create multiple copies of your web app or whatever it is in different locations around the world. How far do you need to take performance over cost? You know, from a user's perspective, they want everything fast, but of course it comes with a cost. What is that justification? What are the boundaries? You know, is there a limit to how far we're going to go with performance? When does it become diminishing returns? You know, you invest $20,000 into something and you've only got 5 users, but they're getting it very fast. Does that justify the cost? That's an extreme example, but you have to find that threshold that you're going to support. Big one that I really push a lot is make sure that you establish policies. Policies that may be applied to your entire organization or just one subscription at a time, or even a more narrow focus per resource group. Now, if you've worked with Azure, you know that I know you've worked with resource groups, but a resource group is nothing more than an administrative arbitrary group of resources that are created for 3 different reasons. For managing the life cycle, you can destroy an entire group and recreate an entire group. So if you want to create it just by its lifetime, or it's a boundary for security, you can set security and permissions at the group level for every resource in it. Or for this can be the scope of your policies. Everything in a resource group has a certain policy. And of course, alerts when certain thresholds are crossed. Dynamically create and destroy. We want to allocate and deallocate resources as needed. Don't hesitate to get rid of something if you don't need it anymore, but make sure you know how to recreate it. Azure includes the concept of templates. When you're about to delete a resource, you could create a template that will allow you to recreate it very quickly. Now, it does not recover any data. So if you were to say, I don't need this SQL database anymore, let me delete it. If you didn't back up the data, it would be lost. So if it contains data, you also need to back it up if you know you ever need to recover it. But if I need to redefine it, then you want to create a template. And a template defines how to recreate the resource. Anything that is idle or underutilized, you will be informed within the Azure Advisor that something needs to be changed. You're wasting money, especially under cost. So it may recommend, or you may discover that you either need to reconfigure it, you may need to consolidate multiple resources into fewer resources, or you may just simply need to shut it down for a period of time, or as in the first point, delete and recreate it again later. Pay attention to what's idle, underutilized. In fact, it could be planned, like you may have seasonal work. A certain time of the year, you really need more resources than another time of the year. Plan for it, reconfigure, shut down, or even delete and recreate again next year. Take advantage of auto scaling. Auto scaling means that based on a certain metric, Azure will automatically create another copy of whatever it is you're scaling. Whether it's a VM, whether it's web apps, whatever it is, you have to decide, though, what is the rule that you will use for scaling. Is it too much of a load on some resource based on CPU, memory, HTTP requests? Whatever that service has been designed to do, how do you know when it's under tremendous load? Now, auto scaling only works for horizontal scaling, which means I want another copy of it. If I need to scale vertically, then I need to reconfigure the resource with higher capabilities. And notice that last point, it is better to scale out before scaling up, because the scaling up is like a permanent change to your pricing. Scaling up means you're willing to pay more from now on. There is no scaling down until you go in and remove some of the features from a particular instance. Choose more yet smaller instances of a services, if that makes sense. My example earlier of maybe a VM that needs to handle graphical, maybe encoding of videos, for example, that's pretty intensive. If one machine can't handle it, 2, 3, 4, or 5 machines that are not working together are not going to be able to handle it either. It's what can one machine handle, and do I need multiple videos coming in that need to be handled by different machines? Then I might scale up as well as to scale out. Just make sure, whichever way you scale, that it solves the problem. And the only way to solve the problem, of course, or to know it's solving the problem, is to look at the performance levels and the specific metrics. This is an art. You're going to discover certain metrics are more indicative of heavy load than others. And it may not be the CPU. It could be memory pressure. It could be other things, like with a web server. It could be HTTP requests are getting so high that the server can't catch up. So where do we find out about this information? Well, we want to, of course, be aware of the metrics. We want to always treat cost optimization as a process. That's an important point. It's not a one-time attempt. It is an ongoing process. Use the Azure Advisor. Use the Azure Savings Plans for computing services. Use Azure Reservations. After a while, once you get past the benefits of consumption, you want to start looking at reservations. And if you need to continue to host some of your resources on premises, look at the Azure hybrid benefits of keeping resources on premises and working with the cloud. And most everybody is in that position. Not everyone is 100% in the cloud, but you may get there eventually. Take advantage of auto scaling features and reevaluate your design choices. Now, design choices may not be within your control, but if you can definitely investigate based on certain design choices, because from a technical standpoint, technical users want to use the best technical services possible. They might want to jump on Synapse Analytics and Kubernetes and maybe justify it from a technical standpoint, but keep in mind that it's got to align with the business needs. It's got to align with your budget. It's got to have an approved budget and the costs fit within that budget. So sometimes you have to sacrifice some of the cool design choices because of the budget. And you've got to push back on that we don't really need to use that level or that size or that whatever it is the reason is, if you can tie it back to a business requirement. Now we're going to look at these in just a moment, but it's approaching top of the hour. So we're going to take a break here for a few minutes, and then I will show you Azure Advisor and some of these, and I'll also give you some more reading material from this. So I'll leave it right here. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll get further into cost management. So please be back in a few minutes. And I believe there's something I'd like for you to do during the break. I'll be back in a moment.
Correct. Thank you so much, Tom. We are Indeed, taking a brief break for about 5 minutes. And in that time, we are going to be launching a quick poll, and we would really appreciate your feedback because it helps us to understand your learning experiences as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions for you. So that'll be up on your screen right there. So just take a few moments to answer those brief questions. Enjoy your break.
Yes, I'm ready to start.
Okay, you've got the screen.
Oh, great. So we left off on this slide, monitoring and optimizing workloads. And you'll notice I've got several links embedded right here in the slide. The first one I want to show you is information about Azure Advisor, and then an example of that in my account. So I'll give this link to you also as well in the, come on, there we go. I'll drop this link in the chat. That way you can see this information. Here's the breakdown of what the Azure Advisor is. And here is what it looks like. I'm inside of an account that I have set up. And on the advisor page, notice at the bottom, the green check boxes, they correlate to that acronym I gave you, not in the same order, because for some reason I couldn't remember all of them, but CROPS. We have cost, reliability, operational excellence, performance, and security. So as you add any resource to your subscription, and you have multiple subscriptions, you can include them all in here within the advisor. The advisor is going to monitor every resource that you have available, and it will go based on recommendations from Microsoft of what you should do in order to improve any one of these areas. Lower your costs, improve your security, increase your reliability, every one of these. Now, I don't have much in this account, but you'll see over here to the left that it will have a list of multiple recommendations for security, reliability, cost, etc. Or you can see, give me the full list. Now, I don't have anything running long enough I've actually followed through on every one of the recommendations, so there are none listed here. But what we want to pay attention to carefully is what's called the advisor score. The advisor score is giving me the highest level possible right now because I followed every recommendation. But notice up here at the top, it's looking across all subscriptions. So I could do this for my entire organization, or it could be per subscription. And I could add a few other filters like tagging to make sure that I'm looking at specific things. So notice here we've got a filter, and it can be based on recommendation type, tags, or resource usage. Now, tags have no meaning to Microsoft. Remember, that's the metadata that you set up. What if you had a cost center, say 300, just make that up. I want to see all of the resources that are tagged with cost center 300 and see how well they're performing, how much they fall under each of these categories. Am I following every recommendation for that cost center for the cost, security, reliability, etc.? Now, this is a very simple interface. I wanted to make sure it looks simple as well, because you want to start here. As soon as you start collecting resources, you want to constantly go back to the advisor to see what your score is. And Microsoft does provide some excellent cost recommendations to cut your cost. It may see that you have a certain VM that's running that's not being used at all, or you have a website that's scaled too high that you don't have that many users coming in to justify that cost. So use this. If you have access to one right now, if you have an internal account, I would recommend that you put this as your favorites over here, called the advisor, and check it on a regular basis. If at least weekly, if not daily, until you're comfortable with some of the recommendations that it is indicating that you should do. Now, in addition to the advisor, we also have the monitor. Now, we're going to see a little bit more about the monitor lately, but the monitor, Azure Monitor, is allowing you to determine what is important to you and what metrics you want to follow. So not exactly the same as advisor, because this is left up to you to look at insights, metrics, set up your alerts or query logs, and look for things that are important to you. So those are the two big ones that this course really focuses on and emphasizes that you need to be comfortable with using at all times. The other link I want to show you is called Savings Plans. So what is a savings plan for compute? This allows you to set up a flexible pricing model depending on how you think you're going to use it. So let me give you a link for that, which goes right along with what we're talking about with cost savings and why buy a savings plan, etc. So these are some other examples of how you can consider. Now, this is closely related to reservations. That's our next topic. Give you a link to that as well. Reservations means I plan to use a certain resource for in the near future consistently, say for a year or 3 years. Now, that's not just an example. That's exactly the time limit that they provide for you. Do you want to reserve it for a year or for 3 years to eliminate the pay-as-you-go rates? So whenever your consumption or pay-as-you-go rates are getting higher than what you would normally pay for reservations, that's when you need to switch. You need to buy a reservation because you know you're now going to use it. And as I mentioned earlier, it could be up to a 72% savings from pay-as-you-go prices, depending on how you're using it. Now, if you're not going to be using a resource consistently for a year or 3 years, don't do it. This is saying, we're getting to the point now that we'd like to have a discount because we know we're going to use this resource maybe even indefinitely, but consistently for a certain period of time. And then the hybrid benefit, most everyone is, come on, trying to link to it. Oh, there we go. Most everyone is working in a hybrid environment where you have a lot of computing services on premises, and then you may have cloud services that you're moving toward. How can you connect the two? How can we make sure that certain licenses that we may have used on premises can also be used in the cloud? So this is an area to go over, and also to use what's called the savings calculator, shown down here on the home page, of how you can take advantage of what you may already be doing on premises if you're looking to shift it to the cloud or connect to something in the cloud. What type of savings could you experience? Great tools right there built into Azure so that you can monitor and stay on top of the resources and your workload that's using those resources. All right, cost management. Now, cost management, let me give you another link for that in the chat. Involves these key points here. Continuous monitoring with multiple tools. Now, I showed you a couple of those tools already with the advisor, with the monitor. We also have, for security purposes, we have Microsoft Defender for cloud, Microsoft Defender for identities, etc. Monitor as much as reasonable. Now, we have so much that we can monitor that you can be blown away or overwhelmed with information. So it's going to take a while to focus in on which measures are going to provide you the information that you need. Notice that second point, though, rigorous process. You need someone that is dedicated to this, that can figure out exactly why you need certain things, what you're being charged for it, and making sure you stay within certain constraints, because we want precise measures of what really is needed. Many times when we're building an application, we may be unsure really of how many transactions a particular solution is going to handle, how many files something is going to, what size of files. So this may be an ongoing process. So while the third point is important, it's iterative. You have to review it often. What is currently being done? What are the future forecasts of how much it's going to cost? This must be considered a key principle in working with cloud resources. And this is a key principle, even if you're using a combination of vendors, AWS, Google, Azure. The more variables, of course, that come into play, the more important this process becomes. It's a key principle. So that cost management and billing tool that's in Azure, I gave you a link to that. Let me first go over to the overview. You can see some screenshots of what that is. Is that the same one I gave you? I think so. Yeah, that's the same one. So what is it? What is it you can do with it? And it's also bringing up a diagram we're going to look at later of how charges are processed. and what you can do to keep those to a minimal. All right, so let's take a look at that in my account. So I keep this down here toward the bottom, called cost management and billing. Basically telling me what I've been billed. Now, this is an account that I try to manage because I get a credit as a developer with Microsoft partner services. So I want to keep it under that credit. So I set up a budget. Excuse me. So I can keep track of how things are being spent. I really haven't done much on this one. Let me switch to a different account, see if that may help. Actually, not that one. Sign in with a different account. Oops. Here's another one that I use for classes that may have some leftovers in it. So I'm switching between tenants and subscriptions, but it still requires cost management. Oh, well, you can see I haven't been working with that recently either. I got the same thing. So last bill, but over time, if I look under resources, recent resources, I know I got rid of these about a week ago. There's nothing there either. But even under the subscription, we have cost management, cost analysis, cost alerts, and I have set up my own dashboard and put on here a tile for cost by resource and a spending rate forecast. I know that. Yeah. So if I go back to my dashboard, now these tiles are coming from cost management. I just wanted to make sure they were clearly available on my dashboard that I start with. Taking a moment to load the data. But you can, oh good. So you can do the same thing. Now these are very low cost right now because I'm deliberately deleting things as I go, but it's well below my credit spending rate. So I've got a credit in this particular account of just $100. I've got $86 remaining. So I'm making sure I'm only spending very, very little. So I'm constantly shutting down, recreating, experimenting, but making sure that, and I'm actually using this. This is a very low cost because I'm paying attention to it constantly and not over provisioning anything. So that's why the advisor has nothing to recommend, because I'm following all of its advice. But notice what it's letting me see, that it's got cost by resource. I've got it broken down by these different names of different resources that I have. I also have a trending rate to show that, you know, within the period of time that gray line is my billing period, that I'm not even near $100. But I can easily spend $100 in 5 minutes. So when I get in here to start experimenting and I forget to close something down, I can go over that limit. It will shut down the account because I told it do not ever go over this limit. And I can decide whether to keep spending or not. That's some of the things you need to consider. What, you know, even though this is a very, very low budget, you may have a budget of $100,000 per month. You still need to set this up. You still need to look at how your money is being spent, and especially that spending rate will give you an indication that if I don't change anything, I'm going to go over a certain budget amount. You can start sending out notifications when you've reached a certain threshold to give you a heads up. Please do this, especially if it's a personal account that you've set up and you can't afford the $100,000 budgets per month. So they provide you the tools to help you control the cost. Please use them. All right, so what are some things we can do, some examples? Well, as I just showed you, we can report and analyze costs in the portal. If you're using Microsoft 365, which used to be called Office 365, it also has its own admin center. And if you need to report on it with other tools, you could export it as a CSV file. So exporting it can be very handy, maybe just for going to a meeting, if you want to present it a certain way, or if you want to use other tools like Power BI to demonstrate. Monitor costs, anomalies, schedule alerts. That's a repeat. Notice the third one, split shared cost with cost allocation rules. Now that's a newer feature within cost management that based on certain tags or certain metadata about certain resources, we can identify where things should be distributed to. But Microsoft is only going to expect payment on the subscription. How you break down the subscription will be up to you internally, but Microsoft still expects you to pay for your subscriptions. If you have one subscription or 20 different subscriptions, there will be a monthly charge and an expectation of payment. Now you can customize the invoices based on your allocation rules and your groupings so that you can see when you get an invoice how you might handle that internally, and you can build your own custom reports of how resources are being paid for. Now, of course, we've got payment options, different ways of paying for the invoices, billing information. All of that is available within cost management and billing. So that link I gave you earlier, the last one I gave you about cost management billing overview, please review that. You'll find some interesting ways of staying on top of your costs. Now, here's that diagram I pulled from documentation to show you how your charges are being accumulated and processed. So they refer to this commerce system within Azure as a pipeline. So whatever costs are being incurred from Azure, Microsoft 365, Dynamics, or the Power Platform, which is Power Apps and Power BI, etc., all of those charges are going to be sent in this pipeline. The very first thing that's addressed are discounts and credits. So that can be taken off the top. So depending on your subscription, your arrangement, or association with Microsoft, they offer many different subscriptions from individual developers to enterprise-wide discounts. Then they will publish the invoices. Now notice too, there is another input at the bottom, connectors for AWS. So they're going to also be applying, they're not charging you or keeping track of your costs for AWS, but they're letting you bring that into this pipeline to identify anomalies and also to trigger some advice, some recommendations of what you need to do to maybe cut costs. And then notice here we can apply the cost allocation and send alerts if something is unusual, something goes over a certain threshold. After that, the cost management blade inside of Azure will let you do an analysis of the cost, or you can export the data and use it with other tools. So that's a good, clear picture of how Microsoft is going to help you cut costs, manage those invoices, and even bring in other vendors such as AWS in order to give you some recommendations. So how should you set this up? In a large organization, one subscription is probably not going to cut it. Even in a medium organization, because you've always got at least a development, prototyping, testing side, and you've got real production. So you're going to have at least two separate subscriptions. Maybe IT pays for development, and the rest of the organization pays for production. But depending on how large the organization is, you're going to end up with 5, 6, 10, 20, even or more subscriptions. Now, every subscription is going to include the resource groups associated with that subscription. You cannot spread a resource group between two subscriptions. So we don't even go down into resource groups in the concept here because they're always going to be on one subscription or another. But one subscription could report based on sections and billing profiles. So let me give you these links, and I'll drop these in the chat again for more information about setting up multiple subscriptions. And it starts off with a video here. And let's see if there's a better diagram I can refer to. I'll use that same one. I won't run the video, but you'll see that we have yellow keys across the middle here that indicates multiple subscriptions. Now, these subscriptions can be associated with an account, a department, and a billing account. So let me give you that link here. This has to be set up by you, though, so you can so you can tell Microsoft how you want to report the invoice. They still are going to charge you by subscription, but by following that video and reviewing it down further, you can see how to set up these concepts of departments and a billing account. Otherwise, a subscription just falls under a billing account. There's no way to control that. All right, the other thing is, how do I manage the invoice sections that I want to appear on the bill? Oh, here's the diagram I was looking for. This one's better. This is similar to what's in that video, but give you that link. So notice a subscription is going to point to your resources in a resource group. The subscriptions could be under different invoice sections. They may be grouped under one or always under one, but an invoice section may contain multiple subscriptions. Then there could be a billing profile wrapped up to a billing account. Those levels between the billing account and the subscription are simply for reporting to you. That's it. It doesn't really change how Microsoft is going to expect you to pay all 4 subscriptions when they send you the bill. But if you need to investigate where this is coming from, then you need to set up invoice sections and billing profiles. Good section to review. It's not absolutely required because it falls back to, well, whoever owns the subscription, that's who's going to pay for it. And it falls back to that person. Now, all of this is available under enterprise agreement subscriptions. So this would be, falls under this next one, use departments, enrollment accounts for reporting. Now, all Azure accounts have something called management groups. Now, management groups are in addition to departments and billing profiles. They're an administrative boundary that lets you manage the subscriptions from a group above. So a management group is a group of subscriptions. For the same reason that we have resource groups to manage the lifetime of your resources, management groups are a higher level to manage your subscriptions. But this is not related to the invoicing and the billing profiles. That's a different way of how to report the bill. This is how to manage the subscriptions. So it's a hierarchy. Here's an example. Up here at the top, an example of a company, an organization that has management groups, and then underneath the management groups, they'll have a subscription. Management groups can be layered or nested. You can have one management group in another management group. Subscriptions cannot. Subscriptions cannot be nested, so they must be associated to one management group. So notice they've got their company Contoso has this breakdown of hierarchy. It doesn't look like, of course, it's by department. It's how they want to manage subscriptions. So they have different subscriptions for platform, for landing zones, what has been decommissioned, and a sandbox to try things out. These are not subscriptions. These are just groups above subscriptions. So one subscription has to be associated with one management group. They cannot be shared. So management groups are not supported in cost management. That's where we just looked at. So that can be confusing. It depends on how you're viewing the costs and how you want to report on the costs. That's through departments, enrollment accounts, and invoice sections and billing profiles. Management groups are at the administrative level that has nothing to do with costs, but how do you want to manage and control policies and security across your subscriptions. Did I post that one in there? Yeah, I did. All right. And then resource groups, like subscriptions, are for the same general purpose, to administer security and policies on whatever's below them. So the lowest level that we have are resources that are in resource groups. Resource groups are in subscriptions, and subscriptions are inside management groups. And that's it. There's nothing higher than a management group, and the highest management group is called the root. So you may only have one, the root management group, and you could put multiple subscriptions just in that root. It's up to you how many different levels of management groups you want to manage your subscriptions. And the larger the organization, the more likely you're going to have multiple management groups. But don't create them until you need them, until you've carefully thought out how you want to manage it. Now, the last point is beyond either one of these, this concept of billing profiles and departments or management groups. Tag resources are a completely separate concept of labeling your resources and your resource groups. I mentioned these earlier because it's something you probably want to enforce through policies, that every resource must have some piece of metadata associated with it. Some examples, as I listed here, I already mentioned cost centers, if you're using them to manage cost, what department are they used in, and it could be multiple departments, what business units use these particular resources, which applications are dependent on these resources, environments, projects, owners, developers, contacts, you name it. It's up to you to name whatever is important to manage your resources. Use tags. You'll find them invaluable in the long run as you try to report on, especially on costs, but also how you might want to build reports for taking inventory of resources for certain applications or departments. Big tool you want to use is the pricing calculator. I'll go ahead and click on this, and I'll give you the link in the chat. Go in. Oh, I think I must have posted it twice. Yeah, I posted it twice. But there you go. The pricing calculator lets you answer a lot of questions per resource to give you an idea of an estimated cost. Remember, I said start small. So if you're going to start as small as possible, usually the most inexpensive or the least expensive, however you want to word that, is a storage account. So if we go into a storage account, I could say, well, what is it that I'm trying to price about a storage account? Now notice I clicked it and it says it added, but when you're at this part of the page, it doesn't look like anything happened. Scroll down and you'll see that it was added to this worksheet. So once you've logged in, did I not log in? Yeah, I haven't. Let me log in. Quit telling me that. All right, and I wanted to go to the pricing tier. Oh, didn't keep track of it. Well, anyway, I'll figure that out later. So notice right here, it says storage accounts. And as you start adding, you'll notice that this will just add to the list and give you a running total and a total at the very end. So it assumed quite a bit. So after its initial assumption, it says, oh, this is going to cost you $20 a month. Well, it doesn't have to. You can say, well, what do you want? East US, I'm in the East US, so that's fine. Flat versus hierarchical namespace. Now this is where you distinguish between blob storage and a data lake. A blob storage has no folders or directories, but a data lake does. So I almost always choose hierarchical namespace because I usually want to use it for big data for certain reasons. But notice it almost doubled my charge. Now that is actually a recent change. In the past, it was the same charge. And notice too, I can say, is it going to be standard? Or is it going to be a combination? Now, any one of these, I can pick what it is that I'd like to do. Now, notice if I switch to premium, it jumped to $150, but it got rid of choices for redundancy. It also got rid of the data lake because block blob storage type eliminates the data lake, and it also eliminates geographic redundancy. So you learn quite a bit when you go through this that, oh, well, I want to put it back to hierarchical, but I don't want, maybe I want it for data lake. And now notice when I change it to data lake, it automatically put hierarchical namespace. Pay attention to the pricing though. Also, am I going to leverage hot, cool, archive, or standard? There are different pricing tiers depending on how you're going to access the data. Hot means it's going to be the data will be accessed pretty often within 30 days. Cool, on the other hand, is cheaper. However, if you access any data within 30 days, you'll get penalized and it will cost you more than hot. Archive means that I'm not going to access it for 6 months. And if you do, it's not going to be immediate, and you will also be penalized and charged for that type of data. So you can see there's a lot of options, and you need to be prepared to answer a lot of questions. And this is probably the simplest one of all. So knowing what you need, being able to answer these questions will give you a good estimate. And notice this pay-as-you-go. Right now, it's $89 based on my current choices. But if I reserve it for a year, it will be $1,000, but that's for a full year. Divide that by 12, or for 3 years. Yeah, that's actually, I need to investigate why I would want to do that. That's an example of where I don't necessarily want to use the full capacity because I'm not going to use that much. Yeah, so that might not be appropriate here. I'd go pay as you go for storage account. But if I do a reserve capacity, I'm reserving full petabytes. So you get an idea here of how that works. Use the pricing calculator. Notice you've got every topic. If I want to set up a web app, if I want to work with databases, DevOps, hybrid and multi-cloud. Now, some of these will appear on multiple topics. This is not exclusive of every one, but what fits under these categories may help you determine what it is that you're considering when you move. And probably the cheapest, the smallest place to start is usually with just storage accounts. Now, the word containers has to do with Docker containers, not blob containers. That's a overused term. It also does not include Cosmos DB, which also has containers. But when they say containers as a category, they mean Docker containers from Docker images. How will you host those? Here's all the options of hosting the same image across multiple resources. So how do we manage cloud costs? I'll give you some more information here as we go through this. Let me give you a link actually to this page too. I had that in a separate link, just a second. Yeah, here it is. All right, I'm dropping this in the chat as well. You can follow along with the exact steps from this documentation of how to manage costs. So here are the 7 steps. We want to optimize enterprise costs, define a strategy. Now, defining a strategy is not always easy, and it's not strictly technical either. It still ties back to business requirements. Develop a cloud adoption plan. So if you're going to be leveraging multiple resources, using multiple resources, when and what order and how are you going to adopt that move to the cloud? So developing a plan is important. And then we have this concept of what's called landing zones. That's a term we haven't seen yet. I think we may have seen it in a diagram, but we'll see what that means here in step 4. And then realize that there's waves of migration effort. That means iterations. It comes and it goes, just like waves on a beach. It never stops. What are you going to do with every iteration? Keeping it customer focused. And then making sure that you implement sound operations or good operations that are robust, reliable, and can be repeatable. So let's break these down. We'll go through these rather quickly. Number 1, evaluate and act on overspending or unplanned spending. Well, how will you know that? Well, if you don't have a budget, if you don't have a plan, then you're not going to even know when you're going over that. So that means you must establish some type of budget and monitor the use of the resources, making sure you're on top of unused or underutilized resources. So what does that bring you back to? Advisor. You want to look at Azure Advisor to give you some idea of what you could be may have over provisioned. So if we talk about virtual machines and an infrastructure type approach, we want to shut down VMs that are not being used. Now, shutting down a VM does not eliminate the cost of the storage of the disk for those VMs. It only eliminates the computing cost. So VMs always have two costs. They have a storage cost for the drives or the disk, and they have computing costs when they're running. So the second point is you also want to delete and deallocate to eliminate all costs. If you just shut down a VM, you're not eliminating all costs. So that's why there are two separate steps listed here. We also want to ensure proper sizing, everything from VMs to databases. In fact, a SQL database has the widest range of sizing capabilities. Let me demonstrate that real quick, just so we can get more hands-on with the portal. So if I go into a SQL database, let's see if I have one. Okay, I don't. So I'm going to create a sample database. This is creating an Azure SQL database. Let's see, admin. Yeah. All right, no, I created a different one. Let's call this an RG demo so I can get rid of it later. I'm going to call this AW for AdventureWorks. And we're going to create, do I already have one? Let's create another one. Create a new one, and I'll call this JTK demo. Good. So using my, well, it's not even demo, but my fingers are not lined up. EE. All right, so JTK are my initials. Demo. Now notice this database.windows.net, that is a globally unique URL. Keep it in the US. Blah, blah, blah. Use Azure. Yeah, that's fine. You know what? Let me just set up SQL. I will call this student and a password. Good old PA $W0RD. See if that's okay. All right, good. Now, a database server is nothing more really than a firewall server that's going to protect whatever databases I put on it and behind it. And then my database, Elastic Pool, no. Production, no. Serverless. And I also am going to use the sample database, which is AdventureWorks. All right. Now, let's look at the compute and storage. When it said choose the right size, notice that Microsoft, whether you're going through the portal or through scripting, there will be a default most of the time for these resources. But if I go in and configure the database, this is where my first opportunity is to say, okay, what am I going to pay per month? $4.78 a month. That's pretty good, pretty low. What if I push up the number of cores, or go strictly from a virtual core setting? If I want to set up some 1 terabyte of log space allocated, that in itself changed it to $577. But this is the budget-friendly version. What if I go to hyperscale? I can push this up even higher. Maybe even set up some replicas. Now this is the price per second. And both of these are serverless, so I'm not having to deal with anything, but I could even go up to business critical. And that's $64,000 per month. So instead of jumping to that level, which is outrageous if you're just starting out with a new database, Start small, start very small, and scale up. Now, every one of these examples I'm showing you here is scaling up, but I also could turn on scaling out, which is down here, done for enabling the scale out for reading purposes. But I picked this one because SQL has one of the most dynamic and widest range of scaling capabilities of almost any resource. So you saw I went from $5 a month to $65,000 a month very easily. So that's an example too. You probably want to create a policy to keep that from ever happening. And if you do want to go to that level, you want to gradually move up to it based on monitoring the service to see if you really need to scale up to that level, if ever. Now, there are other services that can cost much more than this. And one of them is Synapse Analytics. So that's examples of, it's not so much that Azure can be expensive, it's that you have to manage it. It can be very cheap, but it has to be managed. So ensure proper resource sizing and scaling is really very important. And always align spending to budget expectations. Number 2, define a strategy. Record motivations. That's an interesting one. There's nothing in Azure that has to do with motivations. That has to be decided within your organization. Outcomes and business justification. That's 3 areas that, excuse me, should be documented carefully as you move into Azure. And here's a couple of links in here that I'll give you as well. We have a strategy and plan template that can be used. Drop that in the chat. It's a kind of a long link there, but and notice one of the things that's down here at the bottom is what are the motivations, what are the outcomes? And that's why that question of that you need to answer is, why are we moving to the cloud? That is actually the name of the page in Microsoft's documentation for motivations. Can you answer this question within your organization? This is for business and technical stakeholders. There needs to be a clear answer, not we are told to move to the cloud. We do need to know why, because why is going to be closely related to your expected outcomes. That's the second link. So instead of focusing on what tools to use, let's first focus on the motivation to move to the cloud. What is your strategy? Why do you need a strategy? And what is it you expect to gain? And then the last point is define the business case that justifies the expenditure and the effort to move something to the cloud. Without this, you will not know if you succeed or fail. In fact, you may get a lot of pushback because how much something costs. Even if you can say that, this is a lot less than what we've been paying on premises, if you have nothing to back it up, you have no baselines, you have no motivations, you have no business cases, it could jeopardize the project, no matter how simple it is, to move it to the cloud. So these are very good points. I think are some of the most important points within this webinar for anyone considering moving to Azure. And then create a budget. If you have yet to create a budget, use the tools that are in cost management and billing and formally enter that budget into your Azure environment. Monitor it carefully. Set up alerts based on that budget. Create a budget. How many times have you heard that within personal finances? You got to have a budget. You got to have a strategy. Step 3, develop a cloud adoption plan. An adoption plan has several points to ask. And that is basically, once you have a reason to move to the cloud, you also need a plan of how you're going to do it. So don't develop the plan until you have the strategy. They're not the same. Develop the strategy first, define it clearly, and then plan on how you're going to make it happen. Here's 6 points. What are the prerequisites? How do we prioritize the workloads? Now, workloads are typical business processes that you have to go through, you have to perform. So prioritize the workloads that you're considering moving to the cloud, and that'll help you define what resources may be needed to run those workloads. Align the assets, that's what I just mentioned, step 3. Review rationalization decisions. Go back to that motivation and rationalize why this is going to work with our decision. Establish iterations. Don't do it all at once. Make sure you set up a cycle of events that need to be done over a period of time. Release plans. I mean, when are you going to go live? When are the stakeholders going to see what is going to be available to them? And what are the timelines? It has to be measured by time. Otherwise, it may never happen. It may take forever. These are not easy to do, but this gives you a clear indication of how you would address it instead of trying to just force things to happen. Have a strategy, define it clearly based on business requirements, and then work your plan to fit that strategy. Now that brings us to the concept of landing zones. This is number 4. Oh, before I leave this, one more thing I meant to mention. There's another calculator that is very involved, way beyond the pricing calculator that I gave you earlier, and that is this TCO calculator. If you want to know how much money you're going to save or incur, this is the tool to use, because at first, and it's a lot more work than the pricing calculator, because it's going to help you understand how much you're spending on your workloads on premises and how much you could possibly save by moving to the cloud. So this is a good tool to use for total cost of ownership. That means the total cost of ownership of your workloads, and also whether what you own on premises is what you're going to be moving to in the cloud. So notice the workloads are defined first. What do you need your servers for? What are your databases doing? How much storage? How much networking? And then continue from it. That's just page 1. What's nice about this, though, is you can keep track of them. This will help create reports that you can build on, because you're not going to be able to probably answer all these questions in a single day. It takes quite a bit of investigation to work through this, but it is definitely worth it. It may even be surprising and revealing some of the costs you already have on premises that you, or maybe even your manager, is not aware of. So a landing zone, here's the definition I've got at the top, is an environment for hosting your workloads, usually pre-provisioned through code and templates. So landing means basically, where am I going to bring it to? You know, like landing a plane. Everything we're moving to the cloud has to land somewhere. So the environment that you build for your workloads should be as good or better than how you're hosting them on premises. So when it says usually pre-provisioned, probably 90% of the time when we use that term landing zone, is something that's been thought out and has been predefined, and we can create that environment as often as we need to, because it's defined with a template. What is a template? Let me demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to go back into Azure. Let me choose one of my storage accounts. Sure, I'm not going to follow through with that SQL database. Here's my storage account. And the way this storage account was defined could be provided through what's called export template. If I export this template, this is going to create a JSON document, JavaScript object notation document, that says this is how this entire resource has been set up. If I save this as a file, I can easily recreate this storage account, but it will be empty because this does not back up any data that's in it. This just defines the structure of the resource. Same thing with a landing zone. Now, a landing zone is typically an entire resource group. So if I go back out to this storage account and I see that the resource group that this is in is called RG admin. If I choose this resource group, it also has the capabilities of exporting a template. Notice inside this resource group, I've got 3 resources. It includes a storage account, a key vault, and log analytics, 3 different types of resources. But if I export the template, it's going to define all 3 resources. So this is another big reason to carefully plan your resource groups, is this could be the definitions of your landing zones. When I move things from on-premises to the cloud, where is it going to go? Well, it needs to be clearly defined through a template or through code, but most appropriate is going to be a template. This is a declarative form of defining what needs to be set up in the cloud. And notice too that you have cost analysis and budgets associated to this group. So you can keep track of exactly how this one resource group is incurring costs for within your subscription. Now that's going to take probably a little bit longer than we have time for, but I wanted you to see that once this template has been created, I can download it, I can save it somewhere else, and then reuse it to recreate this landing zone 3, 5, or 100 times, and put different resources or data within it if I need it multiple times. So that's what we mean, first off, by the landing zones. So you want to deploy your landing zones like templates that can host workloads in a short-term adoption plan, which means we're going to try this for a little bit. We're going to set this all up. We're going to try it out. I'm going to monitor it. I'm going to look at the cost, but I'm not really moving, into the cloud full-time or any mission-critical steps. This is not the final release, but it's a good way to start optimizing the cost and say, oh, well, we shouldn't do this or that, or I should tweak this here, tweak it there. So you're always looking at optimization of the landing zones. Even after it's in production, you want to keep looking at it and making adjustments and fixing your landing zone definition. You also want to track costs across all these landing zones, follow recommendations. Remember, Azure Monitor may be doing that, and monitor usage and spending within each landing zone. Now, with each of these hyperlinks, I do have some other links to give you. Let me drop these into the chat. So one of the first ones was tracking costs. There's a link for that. Recommendations. And then finally, cost management alerts, monitoring and setting up alerts, which is similar to what we've already discussed. Documentation on how that's done. All right, we're only halfway. Number 5. Oops, I got 2 merged together. Didn't mean to do that. Number 5 is to plan for waves of migration. And in other words, set up iterative cycles. So it's a repeatable process, small group of workloads as we gradually move piece by piece into the cloud, benchmarking, testing, resizing, constantly double checking how the workload is being moved, implement cost control mechanisms, and then follow best practices. Let me give you those links for best practices. Now, much of these links are sections of pages that I've already given you. Oh, I just realized this was only going out to organizers. It wasn't going to all attendees. Let me go ahead and click on this then so you can see the page. So best practices to cost and size workloads migrated to Azure. Please do a search for that. And this will give you an idea of, even before you start moving anything over, you'll see repeated concepts I've already mentioned about estimating costs, right sizing, hybrid benefits, reservations. And a lot of this may have to do with moving infrastructure, which still applies to platform as a service, but there's no need to focus on the virtual machines themselves. Step 6 is you want to drive customer-focused innovation, which means that you need to follow what Microsoft's recommendation of a well-architected framework is, and to do a well-architected review as often as necessary. So notice here the Azure well-architected framework has a whole set of sections. I'll drop that also in the chat. And for those listening, maybe we can have those sent to you. I just realized I can't send you those links in the chat. It's only going out to organizers and panelists. And I was just looking at who I could send that to, but I cannot. I can't send them all to you, but they do also have the links. And if you get the slides, all the links should be in the slides. All right. And then the last point, implement sound operations. Where does this bring us back to? That last point, tie it back to your business. Create business alignment for clarity. Go to that link. Always use business vernacular. We have so many acronyms and jargon and words that are highly technical that make sense between technical people that make almost zero sense to business stakeholders. So instead of trying to force them to learn our language, the technical staff should be using business vernacular. It should be using their language. We should be comfortable with both, because we don't want to confuse business stakeholders with jargon. And we may not be aware of it sometimes. So by taking the time to try to align cloud management with the business, you'll find that you may have to adopt a new vocabulary and tie it to terms, and maybe indicate to them what that means when we're talking about certain technical aspects, but try to always use their domain of words, their vocabulary, their vernacular. So when we use terms like I've been using, virtual machines, disk, devices, etc., does that mean anything to the business? The business may be associated with something non-technical and have no experience with technical. The closest they may understand is just simply Microsoft Office. So make sure that we're using terminology aligned with their business. I didn't mean to skip the first bullet point, monitor environment, because it's repeating it over and over for ongoing recommendations to align each workload. So if you're not gradually introducing new workloads, you really won't be able to identify what is specific for each workload. So again, that's why it needs to be an iteration. It needs to be, now we're putting this workload in the cloud, this workload. And again, it should be very simple to start with. All right, so let me introduce you to something else that I did not spend much time on before we move on. And right here where it says monitor the environment. So remember I introduced the monitor feature. Now the monitoring feature or service that's in Azure, this is also called the monitor blade, has these major sections here. We have insights at the top. Now, application insights used to be a separate resource in Azure, and it tied mainly to web applications. It still focuses on web applications, but now it's been incorporated under Azure Monitor. We also have new insights that have been introduced since application insights. We have container insights. Now, this is getting insights into how Docker containers are running within different services, whether it's Kubernetes or ACI or elsewhere. If you're using infrastructure as a service, then we also have VM insights. Every virtual machine that you've already installed, maybe under a subscription, you'll start to get some information about it, its health, its performance, etc. And then, of course, every VM has to be in a network. So if you're monitoring VMs, then you have to monitor networks. So we also have network insights. All of these have been consolidated into one place. Much of these tools have been around for a while in different resources. For example, I'll come back to this in just a moment. If we go into the storage account, the one that I've been using before, it has a monitor section built right in. It has insights just for the storage account. Gives you some information and some metrics. If any of these metrics are important to you, then you can pin it to your dashboard. So I don't have to go digging deep into anywhere to find it. I'll just put it right on the dashboard. If there's not a particular metric that's included right here in Insights, then I can create my own. I can go under Metrics, go into a certain namespace, like maybe I just want to know something about blob storage, blob counts. You know, right now there's appears to be only one, or maybe access to it, how many different transactions, ingress and egress, what's coming in, what's going out. Now, since you do get charged for egress, you probably want to monitor egress and maybe across the whole account, no matter what the data is. Here's all the stores for the whole account and the sum of egress going out. Very low, but it's still egress going out. So that might be something I want to add to my dashboard. Or I may not like the way it's presented. Let's say I make it a bar chart, or I make it a area chart that colors everything below the line, scatter chart, or a grid of data. Area charts, I think, tend to be the best and easiest to see, but that'll be completely up to you. And then I can save this to the dashboard. Now, notice in addition to this, I also have alerts. So if an alert is going to tell me when something has crossed a certain threshold that I know is very high, then I can create an alert right here. So to do that, I can say create an alert. I create the rule, which means what are you looking for? Notice I can set up an alert on any one of these categories. And that's just page 1, page 2. So it could be a log search. Now, a log search means that I'm going to create a query that will use KQL to look at the logs based on this one resource. I could also just check to see what Microsoft's grade of health is on this particular resource. You know, that's something that I really don't have any control over, but it may let me see when something is not available or there's something wrong with a data center that's causing me problems that are not directly my fault. Or it could be metrics. These are numeric measurements, or it could be activity log, things that have gone on within the activity log for this resource. A lot of good things. So let's focus on one that I've already demonstrated. Maybe I want to set it up for egress. So if the amount of data going out is greater than, and notice I can use a unit of measure. We can go with, well, what is it over here? Well, let's go with K. So kilobytes. And the threshold value, I'll set something that's over there on the right. Let's set it to 14. And notice how it created a dotted line saying, okay, that's the threshold visually that you're setting this at. And I can move it, you know, exactly, maybe just beyond that. Let's make it 14.5. So if it ever hits that amount again, I will be notified. Actually, it looks like it's 15. I'll make it 15. There we go. So there's the very tip of that. Now, that's still not a lot, but if it was in, say, gigabytes or terabytes, that probably would be something I would be careful of. I want it to evaluate every minute for 5 minutes. And if it is that amount, that goes over that amount for that period of time, then I want to make sure that it causes something to happen. So this is the rule. If it does happen, I can create actions of what I want to do about it. Now, actions are tied to what are called action groups. Now, an action group is one or more actions. I don't have any, so let's create an action group. And it could be that, you know, I just want to notify owner of storage. Display name is notify owner. Next. I want to notify based on manager role, and the management role is the owner. Enable common alert schema. That's okay. Doesn't have to be. And notify by role. And that's notifications. Now I can send out another notification to someone else by a specific email address, etc. But whoever is the owner of this account will be notified. Next, what else do I want to do? I may not have any notifications. I may just want to handle the problem quietly behind the scenes, and I can kick off a runbook function, send it to an event hub, set up an issue that needs to be tracked through an ITSM system, kick off a logic app, or call a web API endpoint, secured or not. So right here is you can see a powerful way to respond to any alert so that you can fix the problem, address the problem automatically. So that's a great way that if you are setting up these alerts based on cost, how would you address that cost? It could be a run book, which could be written in PowerShell to fix the problem, or any of these, or any combination of these. So it can be all of these or any combination. All right, all I'm going to do is send out a notification. Notice I could tag this action group. In fact, no, let's get that for now. Review it and create it. So now I've created an action group that is going to notify the owner of storage whenever this happens. And then the next thing is, how am I going to classify this alert? Probably the least critical would be informational, so it defaults to that. But if this is a serious warning, I might want to categorize it as a warning that I need to address quickly. It's not mission critical, or it's not a serious error. It's just, it should be a heads up that I want to look at it. Let's see, storage peak. Check storage egress peak usage. Don't want to tag it. No. Review and create, So now if that threshold ever gets crossed again at 15,000 kilobits, then I will be informed. So I do have an alert stored with this resource or associated with this resource, but it's also in the global monitoring area. So if I go down to Azure Monitor, you'll notice that we have metrics and alerts. Same interface we have for metrics. The only difference is it doesn't default to a scope. I have to figure out, well, what is it that you do want to look at? Is it going to be a web app? Could it be a SQL database? Is it going to be a key vault storage account? Choose what it is that you're trying to build a metric for. So when I was in the storage account, this was unnecessary because it automatically chose the storage account, which is this one right here. So I could duplicate this. Do you want to select? Yes. Let's upvote that. That's a nice way to vote on features that you would like to see within the next release. All right, apply. Now, there we go with egress again. Notice the exact same diagram. This time, let me go ahead and save it to a dashboard. Pin to dashboard. I'll create a new one. We'll call it storage. Create and pin. Then I can go look at it. And I can spread this out a little bit and save it. All right, so that's actually showing. Let's turn on auto refresh every 15 minutes. And let's look back over 3 days. All right, so what is this peak right here? So this should be the same peak. There we go. All right, we'll save it. Do I have another one by that name? Oh, I do. That's left over from before. Let me delete this one. All right, so here's the one we just did. All Past 3 days. Still doesn't look like it's going back enough time. But anyway, you get the idea. This is the dashboard that's giving me the egress for an account. The one other thing I want to show you is under monitor. One more point to bring up is the use of views use of logs. And we do that by clicking on view. And when you start working with logs, you must know a query language, and that is KQL. KQL is a very simple query language. It's not SQL, but if you've ever used SQL, you can see how it's simplified, but it also introduces graphical representation of data. So let me drop this in the chat, make sure that that's available so it can be sent to you. But you can do a search too for KQL, and it gives you a quick example down here right on the first page that if you had a table in the database called storm events, and it had metadata in it or attributes for start time, the state. Here, notice here it can say, show me all the storm events between 2 different dates that happened in Florida and count them. Easy enough, right? Well, where does the data come from? With KQL, you must work with data that is based on a time series data type. And in monitoring, we have that in log analytics. So log analytics is now built into the Azure monitor, and it can be a consolidation point of all your logs from every resource in Azure. Bring them together into a log analytics workspace, and then you can use KQL across all logs simultaneously. So this will help you stay on top of very specific situations that you may be aware of in the logs, but you'd have to know, of course, what you're querying for. So, in conclusion, here are the things to remember from this webinar. Know your business and know why you need cloud services. Establish policies based on business and technical constraints. Now, policies are literal policies that can control Azure within Azure. This is not just on paper. These are going to be enforced through rules within Azure. Establish a budget and set alerts on spending. If you can accomplish those 3 across the top, you're off to a great start. Then as you start looking at resources, start small, implement carefully, and deliberately in cycles or waves, iterations, adding more and more to it as you can. But again, start very small. Monitor immediately. Make sure that you're paying attention to what's being built, what's happening to it, how it's being used. And you have to establish your own baseline, because you have to decide what's important to you. Do you care about how much storage is being used? Do you care how long a VM is idle? Review business case and expectations with each change. Now that means business case and expectations of your stakeholders, not you. If you're not a stakeholder, if you're not making the business decisions, this means that you need to find who that is and review what their expectations are. You must manage the expectations of your stakeholders, letting them know where you are, what can happen next, and keep them appraised of the cost of what to expect. Don't let any cost surprise anyone. And the last point, as I was demonstrated near the beginning, is depend on Azure Advisor. Go to Azure Advisor, look for its recommendations, and follow through with them if they make sense and if you know that it's appropriate for that time. It may advise you give you a recommendation that is maybe premature. For example, you're going to use a database and fill it with data within the next week, but there's nothing in it yet, and it may tell you that you're wasting money keeping that database open when you're about to use it. So do carefully consider the recommendations from Azure Advisor. That's it. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you got a lot of useful information out of that so that you can benefit from all the wonderful features that are in Azure and keep your costs to a minimum and be on top of it from a business perspective.
Well, thank you, Tom, for that most informative webinar. And I know everyone's looking forward to lots of Q&A with you. So keep putting your questions into the pane. And while you're doing that, I do want to give the presentation over to Amitash, who is our product marketing manager, and he's going to introduce you to some of our promotions and other webinar related courses. Okay, go ahead. You have the presentation.
Thanks, Tracy. Hello, everyone. So today you've been through a session on specially designed for business leaders and technical leaders on how to optimize cost and what are the tools that are available on Azure which will help you optimize cost. I believe it was an insightful session going through the advisor and various other tools that are available on Azure platform. So here I am trying to present you some of our marketing offerings, and this webinar is just the masterclass is just the first step that you have taken in your cloud learning journey, and there are many more steps that will be following up, and I'll be introducing you to them, and I'll ensure that you can make the most out of it. So give me a moment. Let me just present my screen and take you through the offerings that we have. Okay, that's okay. The presentation mode doesn't seem to be working, but that's okay. So yeah, here we are Netcom Learning. Actually, we are through this presentation we'll be going to the following steps. So about Netcom Learning, the session that we have gone through and the recording for the same, how you will be able to access the session, and some of our we'll be introducing you to the Netcom 365 portal. And then we'll be talking about the training and certifications for Microsoft that we have to offer, and some of our programs as well. So all of these will be covering through these next few minutes. So let me introduce you as Netcom Learning. We are one of the partners of Microsoft in the United States, and we would also like to introduce you as one of we were one of the award-winning partners in the year 2022. Partner of the Year award. We have won this award. There were 3,900 plus submissions for this award from around the world, from 100 countries, and we were the leaders in this section. And we have won this award, the Training Partner of the Year award in the year 2022. So rest assured, you are in safe hands. And some more bits about Netcom Learning. We have been in the training industry since 1998. And we have trained 16,000 plus enterprise customers till date, and 175,000 plus professionals till date. So we have over 3,000 certified instructors whom we are associated with, and we have consistently won different awards in the training industry. So yeah, these are some of our flagship points that you have to remember, and we would like to say that as far as Microsoft is concerned, we are one of the best in the United States and Canada. So the next step, not only Microsoft, we are also associated with various other technology vendors for training. Cisco, AWS, EC Council, CompTIA, these are some of our top vendors. We do deliver training for all these vendors. Some of them we are advanced training partners, some of them we are platinum training partners. So you can always come back to us for training on these technologies. So when it comes to today's session, you've already gone through the session that is maximizing benefits of Microsoft Azure. So by attending this session of today, you are automatically eligible for the AZ 900 Microsoft official curriculum. So you'll be getting access to this curriculum through our Netcom 365 portal. So the steps that you need to take to access this Microsoft courseware, and the steps that will follow to help you unlock the course completion certification, all that will be packaged into emails, and you'll have to just follow the steps that are the email that you receive, and you'll be able to get access to Microsoft this Microsoft course, that is AZ 900 course, and actually unlock the certification, that is the course completion certification post the training. So you also have access to the recording of the session. A handout is given to you today's session, so you can just click on this link, and you'll be able to reach a place where you'll be able to watch the session that you have just gone through. So next step, we'll let me introduce you to Netcom 365. Netcom 365 is our learning management system. This has been specially designed to help enterprises manage their learning needs. So if you are an organization which has a team of learners, you can manage multiple things through this Netcom 365 portal, like getting pre and post training assessment, attendance management. You can check where your team members are, how much of a course they have completed, how they have performed, and all of that. So this is Netcom 365 will help you to keep a track of all of that and manage your training needs accordingly. So as I already told you, you'll also be able to access this AZ 900 courseware through the same Netcom 365 portal once you log into this portal. So how to log into this portal? All those information will be shared with you through an email that will follow. So next, let me take you through some of our offerings for Microsoft, specifically Microsoft Skilling Program. This is one of our flagship programs that we have. Through this program, you can actually, if you have a team that requires training in Azure, security, Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, you can address all these training needs. And you will get great discounts through this skilling program. And you can also get your team certified through this program. There are various benefits that you get through this program. So to know more about this skilling offering that we have, you can click on this link. So you have a handout with you, so you can click on the link, and you'll be reaching out to a landing page where you'll be getting more information related to the Microsoft Skilling Program. So apart from it, we have 2-hour Microsoft private group training that we have specially designed for enterprises again. So this 2-hour free training that we offer, it's specially designed to ensure that you get the gist of how the training happens with Netcom Learning. So if you have a need, if you have a team that requires a specific training in cloud, then we will actually understand your needs first, and we will customize the content and the curriculum accordingly. And we'll take your team to a private group training session, and you'll be able to understand how we work as far to address your training needs. So this is specifically again for enterprise customers. You can just register yourself to this free training program and actually get this group training for your team. Next, let's talk about the value of certifications. So what's the point of all of this? So you are already going through a cloud training program. So it's important that we validate our skills through this training and all of that, because the technology keeps upgrading every year. So with that, we'll also have to keep ourselves upgraded with the technology. So that's the need for the certification. There are various benefits that you get once you get certified. So as an individual learner, when you get certified, you will be recognized in the cloud community itself. And you can once you're certified, you can go for a recertification every 1 year, and you can upgrade your skills, as well as keep showcasing that you're the upgraded person, and we get more job offers, or all those kinds of special facilities by getting certified. So to learn, there are many other benefits, statistically speaking, about when you get certified from an enterprise perspective as well as from an individual perspective. So we have a free ebook related to the win-win of certifications. So you can access this ebook by clicking on this link, and you can get more details related to the importance of certification. Yeah. The next step is like Netcom Plus. This is one of our unique offerings that we have for individual learners. Here, as a Microsoft prospect or Microsoft interested learner, you can actually check out our Platinum package, which is for like $2,999 per learner per year. By signing up for this package, if you're an enterprise customer, you'll be actually getting access to 100 plus virtual instructor-led training courses of various vendors: Microsoft, AWS, PMI, CompTIA, EC Council, etc. So with Microsoft Azure itself, you'll be having like more than 15 courses. You'll be having access to VILT courses for an entire year with just $2,999 per learner per year. So this is about Netcom Plus subscription. You can also check out the silver package and the gold package that we have. And to learn more about this, you can click on this link through the handout. And we also have a learning passport. While the Netcom Plus is an individual subscription plan, the learning passport is more for the teams. So we have different kinds of packages here as well. We have 4,000 plus official courses that you can get access to for an entire year. You can go either by training days, that is like you can go for 25 training days, 50 training days that way, where you'll be able to get access to 4,000 plus courses of all these vendors: AWS, Cisco, Microsoft, CompTIA, Adobe, and etc. Or you can also go for a savings plan where you can invest like $25,000 and get up to $50,000 of courses. So the details of all these plans have been mentioned in a landing page. You can click on Learn More button on your handout, and you'll be able to reach this Learning Passport landing page. So since you've gone through our masterclass today, so the Microsoft recommended next steps. So AZ900 Microsoft for Azure Fundamentals. This is one course which is a VILT course that you can take up, where you'll get access to all these resources that you just went through today. That is the Azure Advisor, Azure Monitor, how to optimize cost, and various other aspects that our instructor just touched today. So all of that you'll be getting in detail. You'll be learning in detail through this course that we have with Azure. So apart from it, once you complete the AZ900, you can also go for the AZ104 course, which is the Microsoft Azure Administrator course, to get to dive deeper into the Azure Cloud Platform. So we also have added some of the links to our webinars that will be coming up next during the month of March, which is related to Microsoft Power and AI. And we also have added some of the links to the blogs. This particular blog that we have is focused more on the certification parts. So you can just check out this blog and you'll be getting an overview of all the different certifications that we have with Azure. So yeah, this is some information that we have here. To keep yourself updated with the latest trends and happenings in the cloud industry, you can click on one of these links and register yourself or subscribe yourself to one of our social media platforms, and you'll be getting the updates from time to time. So this is all I have to share for the day. Please do remember to access your AZ900 courseware through the Netcom 365 portal. So the details will be shared with you through an email after the class. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Amitash. And now let's get to those questions because we are running out of time. All that great information from you. Okay, we have time for Anthony. Would like to know, let's see, where are you, Anthony? For archive, do you need to pay entering the data or rather saving the data? So far, I know there'll be a charge for holding the data, but what about inputting the data for saving? Okay, Tom, can you hear me?
Sorry, I was talking away on mute.
We've all been there.
Yeah. Archiving the data, when you move it into it, it doesn't cost at that moment, unless, of course, it's coming from somewhere else. And then the ingress itself is not going to cost, but it could be where it's coming from may incur a cost. But then once it's in there, the storage would then cost the minimum amount as archive data. Hopefully that answers your question. It's basically where is it coming from is whether it might incur any costs.
Great. Let's squeeze in one more question from Thomas. Can you help differentiate subscriptions from resources or resource groups if there are any differences?
Yes, a subscription is acting like a container of resource groups. So a subscription is how Microsoft is going to expect you to pay for those resources. So a resource group is a administrative container of resources, and then every resource group is in one subscription. So it's a hierarchy from resource up to resource group, up to subscription, and then up to management group.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom. And once again, we want to remind you all that as you do leave the session today, you'll be presented with a short survey. So please just take a few moments to participate, because your feedback definitely helps us understand your learning experience as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. We do want to thank all of you for joining us today. And if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.